Hi everyone, my name is Nick and today I'm going to spotlight some non-toxic houseplants that are perfectly pet friendly. If you have a wonderful little kitty like me, this is my cat Muffin. She doesn't really like being held, so I'm going to put her down, but she obviously lives here in my home with me where I have about 350 houseplants, and I'm very fortunate that my cat doesn't pay any mind to my houseplants, so I can keep non-toxic and toxic plants throughout my home. Of course, I do want to be careful about ever keeping anything that's a fatal houseplant. But I did want to take note. Oh, she seems like she wants to be held a little bit more. I did want to talk about some that I know I've never talked about here on any of my non-toxic or pet-friendly plant videos. I do know I have a couple of older ones here on YouTube, but today I'm going to give you guys some fresh options. And I think all of these are actually pretty interesting houseplants. And the most important thing about all of these is most of them are very inexpensive. I don't think any of these plants would cost you more than $20 if you're buying just a starter size of the houseplant. So what do I want to talk about first? I think I have 8 different options today, and I'm going to share you guys a couple of varieties of just a few of them. The first one I want to talk about is Pepperomia. So this is my Pepperomia pereskiifolia. You might see this often hanging out behind me on my shelf here. It's usually right here, and it hangs out in this lovely penis pot, which also has a butt on the back, which is super fun. This is by a company called Group Partner, which I believe is out of Brooklyn, New York. And Pepperomia pereskiifolia has a very similar look to another very common Pepperomia on the market, which is Pepperomia tetragona, or padiolata, whatever you want to call it, which is the parallel Pepperomia, and it also just has a very similar look to many other Pepperomia on the market, because it just so happens that there's like 50 to 100 Pepperomia on the market, let alone over 1,000 different species and varieties in existence. So there is a lot of variety that you're going to get between Pepperomia. In fact, you could probably fill your home with just Pepperomia and you would be able to have like 50 houseplants in your home. But I'm a huge fan of Pepperomia. I've been an advocate for these plants for a couple years now. As, like I said, there's just so much variety. So they're just a lot of fun to collect, let alone the fact that they're non-toxic and you don't have to worry about them harming your pet. There are 2 main types, I guess. There's probably a lot more variables to that, but there are 2 main types of Pepperomia that come to my mind. There's the type like this Pepperomia right here that kind of is a trailing Pepperomia. They will shoot off these stems that get too tall and too heavy, and then will flop over and form a nice little hanging basket, as you can see right here. And there's also the Pepperomias that form in more of a like rosette pattern, think similar to like a Sansevieria or an aloe plant. I think an example would be my new Pepperomia Fuzzy Mystery that I got from Steve's Leaves in one of my recent videos. This is a much more succulent stemmed Pepperomia that is going to grow in more of that kind of like rosette pattern, as you can see here. Pepperomia caparata is another perfect example of that, the ripple Pepperomia or the watermelon Pepperomia. So those types of Pepperomias I find a little bit less success with. I have much more success in my own experience growing these more trailing types of Pepperomia. So just something I wanted to make note of there, as I find these are less susceptible to rot. Those other types of Pepperomias are very quick to rot on you upon overwatering, but these ones seem to be a little bit more hardy in that nature. But there are just so many types of Pepperomias. I talk about them a lot here on YouTube, so I don't really want to dote on this one too much. But if you have a medium to brightly indirect lit home and you are not too heavy-handed on the watering, I think Pepperomias are a lot of fun. You will often find them in the terrarium selection of your houseplant stores in just small little pots, and that's really all you need, as these plants don't get too big. You can kind of see with this one here that I've had for probably 2 years now, that the vines kind of get to a point where they max out probably a little bit over 1 foot, and that's when they start to put off new shoots from the base of the plant. So you can see like this plant right here has like 4 different shoots that have come off as each of them max out, and then they put off new growth and it just continues from there. So the plant that keeps on giving, they're very easy to propagate from either a stem cutting or even a leaf. You could literally just take off a leaf, and as long as you have some of the petiole, which is the little, as you can see on these parts, the little red part that connects the leaf to the main stem right here, this is where the roots are going to come off and new plants go into form. So not many houseplants other than succulents that you can propagate from just a single leaf. So that's very exciting, but this is just such a fun little Pepperomia that I know I've had for a while. It's always sitting in the background here. People are always asking about the penis pot, but I did really just want to focus on this plant today. Really wonderful Pepperomia that I've been seeing a little bit more commonly lately, and as I mentioned, it's very inexpensive. I've never seen this Pepperomia sold for over $20 for a starter pot, if not much less than that. So the next one I want to talk about today is this lovely little guy right here that I feel like I've also never really talked about. Let me just take it out of the saucer. So this is a Cissus amazonica. I got this earlier this year when I did my first Gully greenhouse unboxing, which is a online purveyor of houseplants that sells plants from plugs, which is really exciting because that's kind of the first step that nurseries get their plants in before they plant them up in the planter. So it's kind of just skipping like a third party, if you will, and you just get to buy the plant directly as the growers would, and you get to grow it out yourself, which with this Cissus amazonica I know is one where the price can kind of fluctuate. I've seen it online for hefty prices at some points. However, I've readily walked into local houseplant stores around me here and found full hanging baskets of this plant for like less than $25. So I guess it's all kind of subjective there, but this is just a little one I've been growing up from a plug since this is a plant that prefers higher humidity, as this cissus and a couple other cissus, such as the Cissus discolor, do prefer. I put it underneath a glass cloche and it's just been circling around and doing its thing ever since. I just took it out today for one of the first times, and you can see how pretty interesting this plant is. I think it's got a lot of character. I just love how it's just going all around. I'm sure if I took it apart, it would be a nice vine, but this is just too beautiful. It's like its own little topiary in itself. Cissus, as I mentioned, like a lot of humidity, and these types of cissus do prefer a little bit more moisture. They still would like a more, like, not necessarily well-draining mix like a succulent would need, but think more like an aroid would kind of prefer a little bit more perlite in the mixture just to keep it from sitting in like a super loamy, like wet soil. But I do find they need to be watered a little bit more often, but cissus, I'd say across the board, aren't the most easy houseplants. I wouldn't call them a beginner houseplant, but they are by no means for the advanced grower. I think that anybody, even in their first year of gardening, should give a cissus a try because they're very underrated houseplants. This one right here is one I know got a little bit more attention on the internet in the more recent times, but even the plain leaf Cissus rhombifolia, which is just like the oak leaf cissus, I think has so much character and is a perfect replacement for English ivy, which, if you follow me here on YouTube, you know I've talked about many times as not being a very viable houseplant, although I'm sure some of you might say differently. It's all about experience, but cissus are so great. They're usually very inexpensive. This is one example of one that might cost a little bit more money, but like I said, if you do a little bit of digging, you're definitely going to be able to find it for a much more reasonable price. The next plant I want to talk about today is a palm, actually. So this is a Rhapis excelsa, or a lady palm, queen palm, I don't know. I think it's a lady palm, but I'm sure there's plenty of different names for this plant. And palms across the board are a wonderful non-toxic houseplant, which is also a great option if you're looking for a larger houseplant in your home, although you need to be keep in mind that some palms aren't necessarily suitable for indoor space. Cough, majesty palm, cough. And you also need to keep in mind that this is palms. There's going to be some plants that are called palms, like a sago palm, for example, which is not a true palm and it's very toxic. So do a little bit of research before you just go ahead and purchase a palm. But yes, do not buy a sago palm if you have a pet in your home, please. That is not a very good decision. But this is a lady palm, as I said. These are most often going to be large, like as tall as me, in a large planter, usually in a hotel lobby or something like that. But that kind of makes me love it because it's really got that kind of fake appearance that you see similar to like a lot of Dracænas or Aglaonemas, which are both unfortunately toxic to your pets. Mildly to moderately toxic, not going to send them to the vet more than likely, but still something you got to keep in mind. But these palms just have such a like statuesque appearance, like something you would see in like a museum kind of deal. They just look so elegant and I just really appreciate them. And I've been considering for a little bit of time trying to find the space for a large lady palm in my home, as I've stumbled across a couple of them every now and again for a decent price, as these are usually very expensive houseplants, particularly if you're buying them on the larger side. However, I was shopping earlier this year at a local houseplant store here in Philadelphia. I believe it was Stump. And they had these little tiny queen lady palms for very inexpensive. I believe it was around $10. So it's a very good deal in comparison to the large plants that cost hundreds. This is a very slow growing plant. You can see I've just got this one new leaf coming in here. It has been emerging on this plant for months. It's very slow growing, but this plant has been very tolerant as well. I'd say often when I bring home plants that are this small and this slow growing, they're usually the ones that are going to probably have some of these lower leaves turn yellow and fall off pretty quickly, as it's just not loving acclimating to my home typically. But this one's been proving to be just a very, very hardy houseplant, and it's been very tolerant on underwatering since it is in a very small terracotta planter with a very, very well draining mix, perhaps a little too well draining for this palm. It does dry out very quickly. The leaves will just kind of wilt a little bit. They'll kind of like fold in on themselves, and then I just go ahead, throw it in the sink, give it a really good soaking, and this plant's good as new. So definitely more hardy than some of the other palms that I've grown in my home, say like a parlor palm or such, which can be rather quick to turn like yellow or brown upon inconsistent watering. So really enjoying this palm. I think this is one I've been seeing a little bit more lately in the smaller size, which is very exciting, but a perfect palm in any size. This is one of the only palms I would really recommend to indoor gardeners, as there's a lot of other palms that can be much more finicky, like the Areca palm and the Majesty palm, as I mentioned. So just, like I said, do a little bit of research if you're planning on getting a palm, but there are plenty of varieties out there. I'm just getting more used to them myself. Another group of plants that I'm still getting used to that are pet friendly is ferns. So this is a silver lace fern. I think this is like a Pteris ensiformis. I should have looked it up beforehand. Anyway, this one I haven't had for very long. This is just one that I had left over from the terrarium video that I did a couple months ago, probably just like a month or two ago. And it didn't fit in the terrarium, so I potted up in this terracotta pot, and I've been really enjoying growing this fern. There are other ferns that I've had in my possession for longer that I probably should be focusing on today, but like I said, I wanted to focus on ones that I've never really talked about before, and this definitely fits the bill there. This would read to me normally before I ever got really too knee-deep into houseplants as a fern that I would kill in a heartbeat. In my first year of gardening, got a couple Boston ferns and button ferns and the like, and they die very quickly if you forget to water them. This one has been much more forgiving, and I've known that because this is one that I used to get a lot in stock at the houseplant store when I used to work there, and I really enjoyed how, compared to some of the other ferns, these ones would kind of just wilt a little bit, like I was talking about how the palm just wilts a little bit and perks back up very readily. I've barely paid attention to this plant. I just stuck it in my bookcase next to my desk area and have barely focused on it. You can see there's a little bit of brown that I need to clip out, but overall this plant has really been holding up. But as a fern, you do really need to pay a little bit more mind and make sure that you are watering them at least once a week, if not twice a week. And I did make sure to use a mixture, a soil mixture that was basically right from the bag. I did not add any perlite or any bark to this mixture, as these are used to sitting in a little bit more loamy soils. But I have a lot of optimism with me and ferns, and palms for that matter. Over the next couple years, I really want to get much more used to growing them, as they really do have such an incredible vibe and presence in the home. All these other tropical plants are beautiful. We love all these different colors, but nothing really just gives you that just like bohemian vibe as just a wonderful little fern like this one. So something I want to become more mindful to. If you are very heavy-handed with the watering, this is a perfect option for you. And as far as the lighting goes, you do not want to fry your ferns. The more like thicker ferns, like a staghorn fern, can handle a little bit more sunlight, but these more frilly leafy ferns are going to get fried from some sunlight. So a really great houseplant if you're looking to fill the darker corners in your home. What do I want to talk about next? Okay, so everybody's favorite houseplant. So these are air plants, and they are incredible plants that I feel like do not get enough attention. So this one is a Tillandsia steptophylla, which is a little bit more of an out there air plant, much more thicker leaves, a little bit more white, and obviously it's got this really dynamic curl to it. And then this one is a Tillandsia ionantha, which is probably the most classic standard air plant that you're going to see at every single store that sells air plants. Definitely one of the most inexpensive ones. And I think these plants get such a bad rap. I think it has something to do with, I think most people try out air plants when they're like just starting out their plant parenthood, or before they would even consider themselves a plant parent, because perhaps they're just at a store and they see this very alien-esque thing that is a plant and it's alive and they can barely believe it, and it doesn't have any roots and it doesn't need any soil to survive. Therefore, it doesn't need any water and it doesn't need any sunlight. That's not the case. I can imagine this is something that people bring home. They put it on a bookcase or in their kitchen or anywhere just obsolete and expect it to do something, but but they give it nothing and then it's dead within like a week or two's time, or maybe they go to soak it and they leave it in the water for too long. There's just so many things that could possibly happen that I just think ruins air plants' reputations. But if you have become a little bit more of a seasoned gardener, I would recommend giving air plants another try, because they are something that I personally gave up on for a couple of years, and as soon as I came back to them, I was like, I was missing out on a lot. These have such a different vibe compared to all of the other plants that I'm talking about today, or any of the other plants that I have in my home, simply for the fact that they are just so alien. You can decorate spaces that you wouldn't be able to decorate before. I have this air plant on a little mount thingy that I made that's just like a stick that I glued to a piece of wood that I put on my wall, and I just stick the air plants inside the stick, and I think it looks fantastic. Super easy craft, anybody can do it. And then this one, I just stuck inside a macrame wall hanging, and it just sits on the wall. I take it out to water when I need it. It doesn't need to sit in a pot. I don't need to worry about water spilling on the floor, because it's just not anything I need to worry about with these. And not to mention that they do flower. However, the flowers do cause the plant to die. It's very similar to bromeliads, if you're familiar, where they will flower and then they'll put other energy into making pups. However, I think you can kind of skip that and get a little bit more longevity out of your houseplants if you cut off the flower stalk. You can see on this one here, I removed the flower stalk. It's kind of browning up a little bit on inside the crown there, just to see if it would give me a little bit more longevity with this houseplant. But I don't really know. I don't have enough experience with these houseplants, unfortunately, but they are very interesting. Like I said, if you have been growing houseplants for a couple of years, or if you have failed these in the past, give them another try, because they're very inexpensive. You can do practically anything with them as long as you remember to water them and give them some sunlight. I would say you gotta grow your air plant like within like 6 to 8 feet from a bright window, or perhaps like within 4 feet of a dimmer window. They need sunlight to survive and thrive. But as long as you give them something, they will give you everything. So really interesting houseplants. I know people aren't obsessed with them, so I'm not gonna talk about them for much longer, don't worry. But get an air plant, give them a try, stop hating on them. They're so wonderful. Another group of plants that I think often gets a bad rap as well, which are wonderfully pet friendly, are orchids. This one is called a Brassocattleya yellow bird. I believe the tag's kind of faded away. I got my eye caught on this one when I was at the orchid store, Waldor Orchids, if you guys are curious. This caught my eyes because it looks very similar to like a cross between like a phalaenopsis and like an Oncidium orchid or a Bretonia orchid. Orchids that you would walk into like your local Trader Joe's and see. But this one was just different and very similar to me. It's got the very thick leaves that are like super succulent, very similar to a Phalaenopsis orchid, but it also has that kind of more like lanceolate leaf shape similar to the Bretonias and the Oncidiums. So I don't know, I just really like that one for this reason. Also, it had some really cute little flowers on it that were like pinkish yellow. It was adorable. And hopefully I will get some more flowers soon. As many of you are probably aware, that flowers are basically the whole thing about orchids. It's why people grow orchids, and they are fabulous. I feel like we as indoor gardeners or foliage growers are so much more used to just beautiful foliage, and we kind of forget that flowers really have such an impact on the home. They really are so incredible. So orchids are another thing that, just like palms and ferns, that I need to really get my feet a little bit more wet with. But it just takes time to learn. This one has been growing quite slowly for me, but also putting off some new growth, so that's very exciting. So it's gonna probably take another year or so, hopefully quicker, before I get some more flowers on this, but because of the abundance that all of these plants are growing in on this plant, I'm very hopeful that in due time it'll be one that's flowering pretty regularly for me, just like my Bretonia orchid. I did want to spotlight a couple more orchids today because there are just so much variety in orchids. This one right here is also one that is grown for its flowers. This one, I struggled with it at first. I think I'm just getting it going now, so give me some time. I'm sorry about it. But this is a coconut orchid, or a Maxillaria tenuifolia. This is very grassy, much more thinner. It's a lot different than the last orchid I just showed you. It's got these much more thick little bulbs down here. Pseudobulbs, is that what they're called? I don't know, I'm sorry, I need to do my research. Anyway, this one's called the coconut orchid. It produces these flowers that smell like coconuts. I haven't really smelled it myself, but like I said, in due time, probably a couple years, This is a very young plant. I will get to smell the beautifulness that is the coconut orchid flowers, but this is just a little bit more of a common orchid that I have wanted to try out for a while, but just earlier this year, I believe, or late last year, I decided to bite the bullet and give it a go. I did put it in one of my east-facing windows, and it's in sphagnum moss, so it was drying out really quickly, and I just don't think I was getting to it quick enough. But I have since moved it underneath the grow light where I have much more control over the care that it's receiving. So like I said, I'm hoping that it's going to do quite well, and it's got so much new growth on it just since I've moved it, so I'm very hopeful. And last but not least, I did also want to talk about this one right here, which is brand new to me, so I don't have any care tips or anything. This is a jewel orchid, and while this does flower, this one is grown, on the contrary, for its beautiful foliage, as I'm sure you can tell. The flowers are not nearly the star of the show for this plant in comparison to these beautiful leaves. There are jewel orchids that have green foliage, but this one with the black and pink foliage, I think is probably the jewel orchid that is the most well-known, and fortunately as well, the most inexpensive. I don't think that a plant like this would cost you any more than $25 if I'm not mistaken, probably less for even just like a smaller piece of the plant. So just a really beautiful plant. Like I said, I have had this for like 2 weeks now, so I have zero care tips on this, so I can't even really say anything other than the fact that these are more terrestrial orchids, so you can grow these in soil, versus the other two I showed you are more epiphytic orchids, so they do need to grow inside like a bark mixture or sphagnum moss. So just do a little bit of research on your orchids. All of them are so different, but this one's just so gorgeous. I'm really excited to try this one out in my home. This next one, I actually needed help from you guys when I found it to ID it, so thank you for that. This is a Hemigraphis alternata. I think the more common version of this genus would be the purple waffle plant, which is a very common houseplant that you're likely going to find at any big box store or houseplant store that you go into, which also sports that wonderful shade of purple on the back, which this plant really excited me when I saw it for not only just these very dynamic shaped leaves, but also that silver hue on top led with that purple on the bottom. Really just such a beautiful houseplant, and it was like $2, so it can't beat a houseplant that's basically free. This also just really caught me as a plant that could possibly not do very well indoors. I was a little worried, as this does read to me more like something that you would see growing outside, but I would say over the past like 3 or 4 months, it's proven to be decent. That's not really enough time to swear by a houseplant by any means, but it's giving me hope that this is one that I might have for a couple years down the line, if not longer than that, which I would absolutely welcome with open arms. You can see there is a little bit of yellowing. I actually just repotted this inside here like 2 weeks ago because it was still in that little tiny 2-inch terrarium planter, and it was just drying out so quickly, which this plant, like many other plants, has a very nice telltale sign as to when it needs to be watered, because it's just going to wilt very vocally. and then upon watering within a couple of hours, it perks right back up to be good as new. So I just put it in a more loamy mixture, so soil basically right from the bag, as you would probably do if you're planting up a terrarium, and have it living in here, trying to keep the moisture up. This seems like a plant that would appreciate a little bit more humidity. I'm kind of reading that from now that the heat's kicked on in my home. I'm starting to notice a little bit of browning around some of the leaves. Fortunately, it doesn't really show because of the not green nature of this plant, which is just something I really enjoy about it. I love plants that aren't green. I love plants that are green too, obviously, but they just bring such variety, and people are just like so obsessed with like pink plants, and not that pink plants aren't fabulous. That Ludisia discolor was pretty incredible, but this one just gives you such a different color scheme than you're used to seeing. So this one really stood out for me, and like I said, you can't beat the price. If you're into these witchy, gothic plants that look like something you'd find in like a medicinal herb garden, this is gonna fit you like a glove. In fact, I'm very tempted to propagate this because this piece right here looks like it would just be the perfect one to snip off, and it's got these little bits of growth right here that would probably just like skyrocket new growth, but I really just kind of love the way that this is just kind of like bouncing around. I keep this one right with my silver lace fern on my shelf. It does not receive a large amount of light whatsoever. It seems to be really enjoying it. If this yellowing persists, I will perhaps increase the lighting a little bit, as leaf yellowing is usually something that means that it's not receiving the amount of light that it needs, or it's not processing the water quick enough because it's not receiving enough light. So a bunch of different things that could be a factor, something I'm gonna keep an eye out for. Like I said, I haven't had this plant for entirely too long, so only time will tell. I just need to get a little bit more experience with it. But the purple waffle plant, I will say, I never really had good luck with. They would dry out very quickly, but those leaves are a little bit smaller, so I feel like they had a little bit less leeway in terms of inconsistent watering. But these ones are much larger, and I think they've been handling it much better. But like I said, 4 months isn't really long enough to swear by a houseplant, so I do need to get acquainted with it a little bit more. And actually, one that I got on the same day from the same place as that one is this little Ruellia makoyana. And this is a really fun little houseplant. It's called trailing monkey vine or velvet vine. I think there's like a lot of different names for this houseplant. I've been really enjoying lately these houseplants that have these beautiful deep green leaves with the white or silver veination through them. They've really been catching my eye. And this one too sports that lovely shade of purple on the backside of the leaves that you guys know I'm very fond of. Always one of my favorite characteristics about houseplants. But this one's just like the whole package. Not to mention it flowers too. This one's been flowering like every week or so for me. Unfortunately, it doesn't have any flowers on it right now. Here's a dead one that just fell off, but they're just cute little flowers, remind me kind of similarly of like a gesneriad, very gorgeous. Adds to the plant, but it isn't necessarily the star of the show, but it's always, like I said, I really do appreciate the effect that flowers do have on the home, especially when they're growing on your houseplants. This is one that's also very inexpensive. I do not see you purchasing even like a large basket of this houseplant for more than like $10 or $15. It's very, very inexpensive. And definitely one that's probably not thought to be really grown as a houseplant. I'm sure this is one that people might see in the garden centers and kind of pass it off as one of those things that might be for your window boxes or something, but it is a perfectly applicable houseplant, and they really do just have such a wonderful vibe on the home. They do trail quite a bit, as I've seen. This one I've obviously only had for like 4 months. I have had another one in my possession that I actually recently just took a bunch of cuttings of, and I'm trying to see if it'll, it's got a little bit of growth coming in, but it's not worth showing you guys right now. This is definitely the more better looking one right now. And very similar to many of the other plants I've been talking about today, if you do not water this plant enough, it just wilts a little bit and perks back up. I am trying to be very mindful of that. I am worried. I've been noticing a couple leaves, like this one right here, is getting a little bit like of a rust color. Perhaps it's gonna turn yellow soon. So I've just been wondering to myself, am I watering this inconsistently, or is it perhaps not getting enough light? However, in my experience with these plants, they really appreciate the lower light settings. I've grown my other one underneath a grow light and by a window, and the leaves just got so like blown out in terms of color. They kind of got that rusty color, but like all over them. And I just wasn't obsessed with it, and then I moved it away from the window and it got green again. So I feel like that's something I've learned about this plant. Definitely keep it on the lower light end of the spectrum, which is fabulous because we always appreciate a plant that can practically go anywhere. But this just tells you basically everything you need to know. It could be a little bit more hardy of a houseplant, but it's not one that's going to break the bank by any means. It's not going to die on you in a day like some of the other plants that are out there. So definitely one to give a try. It's just one very similar to the Hemigraphis. I can't swear by it because I haven't been growing it in my home for like longer than a year and a half. This one in particular, only like 4 months. So take it with a grain of salt, but I still highly recommend it. It's freaking gorgeous. And then I think I only have one more to share with you guys today. So this one, I feel like this is the one I feel least confident that I feel like I've probably talked about this one in past videos. Anyway, I'm going to talk about it again, if that is the case. This is a Peleonia Pulkra. Sometimes they call this Peleonia repens. There are a couple different varieties of Pellionia on the market, and they're all really exciting to me. This one I think has the most interesting dynamic foliage because it just really has such an interesting pattern on it. There is the other Pellionia repens that has kind of like a green, bright green stripe around the middle and keeps this kind of like a dark green, brownish color on the edges. And there's the plain green Pellionia, which has like a green, wavy, ridgy foliage. It's quite wonderful, but this is definitely the one I would say is going to be the most readily available. This is the one that you would probably be most likely to see if you were to walk into a big box store. And I did really want to point this one out today because I've been getting a decent amount of comments asking what this plant is every time it's in the background of my videos, as it is one that's on my kitchen counter and it's just sitting back there hiding far off in the background, and it really just has so much character. So this is a plant, I haven't successfully grown one of these for like longer than a year. This one I've probably had now for maybe 4 to 6 months, so not that long. It's been doing very well. As this is sitting on my kitchen counter, just like with my palm, it's one that gets a lot more attention from me. It's sitting right there next to my sink every time it needs water. I've used to grow these like up, hanging on the wall, and then I'd forget about them. I learned my lesson, let's say that. So this one has really filled out quite a bit. I mean, it was pretty full, I'll admit, when I bought it, but it's filled out, it's filled out more, and it looks adorable in this little white planter. So it's super fun to pair these like different color houseplants that aren't just plain green with some other different color planters. I think it really does have such an effect on the home. But this is definitely a more terrarium loving houseplant. I in the houseplant store would practically put one of these in every terrarium, which was mostly because I would buy these in from my terrarium grower and then people wouldn't buy them because they didn't really care about them. Anyway, maybe that is shifting because people seem very interested in it in the background of my videos. But what I love most about Peleonias is they're just so inexpensive. Just like Pepperomia and Pileas and all of those similar houseplants, which I think this is actually in the same family as Pilea. They don't get as much attention, which is fine by me because the philodendrons and the Hoyas are getting blown out of proportion, the price point. So this one, I'm more than happy for this to cost you like $4 or $5 on the regular. But just make sure you give it a good amount of water. If you don't water it, just like all the other houseplants I'm talking about in today's video, it will wilt quite a bit, but fortunately it will perk back up. But just like all of the other houseplants I've talked about today, if you do that too often, there is going to be a time where you go to water it and it's just not gonna come back because the damage has been done. Too much damage. So that's gonna do it for today's video. Pet-friendly houseplants. If you do have a cat or a dog or a child perhaps in your home that you are perhaps worried about getting into your toxic houseplants, need you not worry because there is a whole world of wonderful non-toxic plants out there. And if I didn't make it clear enough, any of these houseplants, like for example, the Pepperomia that I talked about and how I mentioned that there's like 50 to 100 different varieties that are on the market alone, all of those are non-toxic houseplants. All Sissalis are non-toxic houseplants. All Orchids, as far as I'm aware, are non-toxic houseplants. All Ferns. So from just the options that I'm giving you in today's video, gives you like 200 plus different particular houseplants that you can bring into your home. So the world is your oyster, honey. So thank you guys so much for joining me today. If you don't already follow me on Instagram at phillyfoliage, subscribe to my channel, and I will see you guys in my next video. Have a great day.